A millionaire crosses paths with a struggling boy selling his last toy to save his sick mother. But when he decides to help, he uncovers a secret that changes everything. The cold wind sliced through the narrow streets of Brooklyn, slipping through the cracks of old brick buildings and creeping beneath the tattered coat of a small boy. Jake clutched his toy car tightly in both hands, his fingers stiff and aching from the December frost. The car, once vibrant red, was now faded, its wheels slightly wobbly from years of use. But to Jake, it was more than just a toy. It was the last piece of his childhood that he was willing to part with. He took a deep breath, drawing in the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor and the faint metallic tang of winter air. His mother, Sarah, was getting worse. The fever had returned, burning through her frail body with a vengeance. The medication she needed was beyond their means, and rent was already overdue. He had tried everything, asking neighbors for work, collecting discarded bottles for change, but it wasn't enough. Tonight was his last chance. Jake stood near the entrance of a subway station, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on the damp pavement. People rushed past him, bundled in thick coats and scarves, their eyes fixed on the ground or their phones, too hurried to notice a skinny 10-year-old boy standing alone in the cold. He swallowed hard and stepped forward as a man in a long black coat passed by. "Excuse me, sir." Jake's voice was small against the city's noise. The man barely glanced at him before shaking his head and continuing on. Jake clenched his jaw, willing himself not to give up. He approached a woman next, then another man, repeating the same words. "Would you like to buy this car? It's a great toy. I just need some money for my mom." Most ignored him. A few murmured a quiet sorry before moving along, not stopping to ask why a child was trying to sell a toy in the freezing cold. Then, after what felt like an eternity of rejection, a voice finally answered. "How much?" Jake turned quickly, startled that someone had actually responded. The man standing before him was tall, his face partially hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. He wasn't dressed like the wealthy businessman Jake had hoped to approach, but something about him felt different. His eyes, dark and thoughtful, studied the boy, not in pity, but in genuine curiosity. Jake straightened his back, gripping the toy car like it was still worth something. $10. The man arched an eyebrow. 10. That's quite a price for something so used. Jake hesitated. He knew it wasn't worth that much, but he had no choice. "It's important," he said simply. "And it still works." The man's gaze flickered between the car and the boy's determined expression. He exhaled, a visible cloud of breath escaping into the night air. "Why are you selling it?" Jake hesitated again. He had tried keeping his story short, just the essential details, but something in this man's tone made him want to explain. "My mom's sick," he admitted. "She needs medicine, and I don't have the money. Oh, I'm selling what I have." The man was silent for a moment. The city moved around them, taxis honking, people chattering, doors slamming shut against the cold. But in that moment it was just the two of them. Finally, the man nodded slowly. "I see." Jake's heart pounded. "So, will you buy it?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against something before pulling out a crisp bill. Jake's eyes widened as he recognized the number printed on it. $100. His breath hitched. "But that's too much." The man smirked. "Then consider it a good deal." He held out the bill, waiting. Jake stared at it, uncertainty flickering across his face. He had never held that much money before. Was this real? Could he accept it? But before he could reach for it, something in the man's expression shifted. His amusement faded, replaced by something unreadable. Then, just as quickly as he had offered, he pulled his hand back. "No," he murmured. "Not yet." Jake blinked in confusion. "What?" The man studied him for a long second, then glanced down at the toy car still in Jake's hands. "Keep your car," he said. "I'll find you again." And with that, He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowded street before Jake could even ask his name. The boy stood there, gripping the toy car, his mind racing with questions. He had been so close to getting what he needed. But now, all he had was the wind, the city, and a promise from a stranger. And he had no idea if that promise meant anything at all. Jake remained standing near the subway entrance, his fingers curled tightly around the toy car. The stranger had vanished into the sea of hurried pedestrians, leaving behind only the echo of his last words. "I'll find you again." What did that even mean? Jake didn't have time to wait for promises. He needed money now. His mother's fever wasn't going to wait for some mysterious man to return at an unknown time. With a deep breath, he shook off the confusion and refocused. There had to be someone else willing to buy his car. For the next hour, he approached more people. Businessmen in pressed suits, tired-looking mothers juggling grocery bags, college students with earbuds jammed into their ears. The answer was always the same. Some ignored him completely. Others offered a sympathetic smile but walked on. The cold settled deeper into his bones. His feet ached. His lips cracked from the dry winter air. The city, indifferent as always, kept moving around him. Then, just as he was about to give up, a familiar voice stopped him. "You're still out here." Jake turned sharply, his heart skipping a beat. It was the man again, the same one from before. This time, his hood was down, revealing dark brown hair slightly tousled by the wind. His face was lean, with sharp angles and a light shadow of stubble along his jaw. His eyes, though, were what Jake noticed most. They weren't cold like the other strangers. There was something behind them, something that looked almost conflicted. Jake swallowed. "Yeah, I still need to sell the car." The man studied him for a moment. Then, without a word, he reached into his coat pocket again. Jake tensed, expecting him to pull out money. But instead, the man withdrew a pair of black leather gloves and pulled them on with slow, deliberate movements. Jake frowned. "Are you gonna buy it or not?" A small smirk tugged at the man's lips. "You're persistent." Jake scowled. "I have to be." The man nodded slightly, as if he understood. Then, to Jake's surprise, he crouched down so they were at eye level. The city noise faded into the background as he spoke again, quieter this time. "What's your name?" Jake hesitated. He had been careful not to give out too much information to strangers. But something about this man, despite how odd he was, didn't seem dangerous. "Jake," he answered cautiously. The man tilted his head. "Jake," he repeated, as if testing how it sounded. Then, after a pause, he said, "I'm Ethan." Jake stared at him. Ethan. The name didn't mean anything to him. Just another stranger. But at least now he knew who he was talking to. Ethan glanced at the car in Jake's hands. "You said you need money for your mom." Jake nodded. "She's sick. She needs medicine." "I don't have enough." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, though Jake couldn't tell why. He exhaled through his nose and straightened, pulling out his wallet. Jake's pulse quickened. Was this it? Was he finally going to get what he needed? Ethan pulled out a $20 bill and held it up. "I'll buy your car for this." Jake hesitated. He had been asking for 10. 20 was more than he had hoped for. But something felt off. He gripped the toy car tighter. "Why?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Why what? Why are you offering more?" Jake asked. He wasn't used to people giving more than necessary. That wasn't how the world worked. Ethan let out a low chuckle, though there was no real amusement in it. "You don't trust people much, do you?" Jake set his jaw. "I trust my mom." Ethan nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense to him. He lowered the bill slightly. "All right, then how about this? You don't sell it to me. Instead, you tell me where you live, and I'll bring you more than $20. Jake took a step back, eyes narrowing. "That's weird." Ethan's lips twitched. "Fair enough." He slipped the money back into his wallet and folded his arms. "Then how about I just walk with you? I'll take you home, make sure you get inside safe. Jake clenched his fists. I don't need a babysitter. No, Ethan agreed. But a smart kid like you should know it's not safe walking around alone at night with cash. Jake hesitated. He hated that Ethan had a point. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind howled between the buildings, and Jake could feel the heat draining from his fingers, even with the toy car clenched tightly between them. Finally, he exhaled sharply. Fine. But only to the street. Ethan smirked. Deal. Finally, the man nodded slowly. I see. Jake's heart pounded. So, will you buy it? The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against something before pulling out a crisp bill. Jake's eyes widened as he recognized the number printed on it. $100. His breath hitched. But that's too much. The man smirked. Then consider it a good deal. He held out the bill, waiting. Jake stared at it, uncertainty flickering across his face. He had never held that much money before. Was this real? Could he accept it? But before he could reach for it, something in the man's expression shifted. His amusement faded, replaced by something unreadable. Then, just as quickly as he had offered, he pulled his hand back. No, he murmured. Not yet. Jake blinked in confusion. What? The man studied him for a long second, then glanced down at the toy car still in Jake's hands. Keep your car, he said. I'll find you again. And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowded street before Jake could even ask his name. The boy stood there, gripping the toy car, his mind racing with questions. He had been so close to getting what he needed. But now, all he had was the wind, the city, and a promise from a stranger. And he had no idea if that promise meant anything at all. Jake remained standing near the subway entrance, his fingers curled tightly around the toy car. The stranger had vanished into the sea of hurried pedestrians, leaving behind only the echo of his last words. I'll find you again. What did that even mean? Jake didn't have time to wait for promises. He needed money now. His mother's fever wasn't going to wait for some mysterious man to return at an unknown time. With a deep breath, he shook off the confusion and refocused. There had to be someone else willing to buy his car. For the next hour, he approached more people. Businessmen in pressed suits, tired-looking mothers juggling grocery bags, college students with earbuds jammed into their ears. The answer was always the same. Some ignored him completely. Others offered a sympathetic smile but walked on. The cold settled deeper into his bones. His feet ached. His lips cracked from the dry winter air. The city, indifferent as always, kept moving around him. Then, just as he was about to give up, a familiar voice stopped him. You're still out here. Jake turned sharply, his heart skipping a beat. It was the man again, the same one from before. This time, his hood was down, revealing dark brown hair slightly tousled by the wind. His face was lean, with sharp angles and a light shadow of stubble along his jaw. His eyes, though, were what Jake noticed most. They weren't cold like the other strangers. There was something behind them, something that looked almost conflicted. Jake swallowed. Yeah, I still need to sell the car. The man studied him for a moment. Then, without a word, he reached into his coat pocket again. Jake tensed, expecting him to pull out money. But instead, the man withdrew a pair of black leather gloves and pulled them on with slow, deliberate movements. Jake frowned. Are you gonna buy it or not? A small smirk tugged at the man's lips. You're persistent. Jake scowled. I have to be. The man nodded slightly, as if he understood. Then, to Jake's surprise, he crouched down so they were at eye level. The city noise faded into the background as he spoke again. Quieter this time. What's your name? Jake hesitated. He had been careful not to give out too much information to strangers. But something about this man, despite how odd he was, didn't seem dangerous. Jake, he answered cautiously. The man tilted his head. Jake, he he repeated, as if testing how it sounded. Then after a pause he said, "I'm Ethan." Jake stared at him. Ethan. The name didn't mean anything to him. Just another stranger. But at least now he knew who he was talking to. Ethan glanced at the car in Jake's hands. "You said you need money for your mom." Jake nodded. "She's sick. She needs medicine. I don't have enough." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, though Jake couldn't tell why. He exhaled through his nose and straightened, pulling out his wallet. Jake's pulse quickened. Was this it? Was he finally going to get what he needed? Ethan pulled out a $20 bill and held it up. "I'll buy your car for this." Jake hesitated. He had been asking for 10. 20 was more than he had hoped for. But something felt off. He gripped the toy car tighter. "Why?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Why what? Why are you offering more?" Jake asked. He wasn't used to people giving more than necessary. That wasn't how the world worked. Ethan let out a low chuckle, though there was no real amusement in it. "You don't trust people much, do you?" Jake set his jaw. "I trust my mom." Ethan nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense to him. He lowered the bill slightly. "All right, then how about this? You don't sell it to me. Instead, you tell me where you live, and I'll bring you more than $20. Jake took a step back, eyes narrowing. "That's weird." Ethan's lips twitched. "Fair enough." He slipped the money back into his wallet and folded his arms. "Then how about I just walk with you? I'll take you home, make sure you get inside safe." Jake clenched his fists. "I don't need a babysitter." "No," Ethan agreed. "But a smart kid like you should know it's not safe walking around alone at night with cash." Jake hesitated. He hated that Ethan had a point. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind howled between the buildings, and Jake could feel the heat draining from his fingers, even with the toy car clenched tightly between them. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "Fine. But only to the street." Ethan smirked. "Deal." Jake started walking, and Ethan fell into step beside him, hands tucked into his coat pockets. They didn't speak for the first few blocks, and Jake found himself glancing sideways at the man more than once. There was something about him, something he couldn't quite figure out. And for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Ethan walked alongside Jake, his hands deep in the pockets of his long coat. The cold wind bit at his skin, but he barely noticed it. His mind was elsewhere, years behind him in a different city in a different time. The boy's stubborn determination had stirred something in him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. They turned a corner onto a quieter street, the distant hum of traffic fading behind them. Jake walked with a purpose, shoulders squared despite the cold. Ethan studied him from the corner of his eye. The kid reminded him of someone. Himself. Once upon a time, Ethan had been a boy just like Jake, alone in the cold, struggling to survive in a world that didn't care. He hadn't always been a man with more money than he could spend. He had once been a kid scraping by, watching his mother work herself to exhaustion just to keep a roof over their heads. Back then, he had promised himself that he would never be helpless again, and he had kept that promise. At a cost. Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath misting in the air. He hadn't thought about his mother in years. She had died before he made his first million, before he proved to the world that he wasn't just another nameless kid destined to disappear into the cracks of society. But what good was all his success if she wasn't there to see it? He glanced at Jake again. The boy was quiet, his fingers still curled around the toy car as if it were the most valuable thing he owned. Maybe it was. Ethan cleared his throat. "You remind me of someone," he said. Jake looked up, his expression guarded. "Who?" Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure why he had even said it. He wasn't the type to talk about himself, especially not to a kid he had just met. "No one important," he said instead. Jake frowned but didn't push. They walked in silence for another minute before Ethan spoke again. "You take care of your mom by yourself?" Jake nodded. She takes care of me too. But she's sick now. His voice was even, but Ethan could hear the worry underneath it. She used to work a lot, but she got tired, and then she started getting fevers all the time. He swallowed. I don't know what I'll do if she doesn't get better. Ethan's chest tightened. He knew that feeling. The helplessness. The desperation. He had felt it once, watching his own mother struggle, powerless to fix it. What about your dad? He asked before he could stop himself. Jake's jaw tensed. Don't have one. Ethan nodded. He understood that too. They reached the end of the block, where the streetlights flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. Jake stopped and turned to face him. This is far enough. Ethan studied him for a moment. The kid had pride, too much of it for someone so young. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the $20 bill he had offered earlier. Take it, he said. Jake hesitated, then shook his head. I told you. I need to earn it. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Stubborn kid. Instead of insisting, he slid the bill back into his pocket. All right, he said. I'll see you around, Jake. The boy hesitated, then gave him a wary nod before turning and disappearing down the street. Ethan watched him go. He had planned to walk away, to forget about the kid and go back to his life. But something told him that wasn't going to happen. The wind howled through the narrow alleyways as Jake hurried home, his fingers stiff from the cold, still gripping the toy car. His breath came in short puffs, but he didn't slow down. He had wasted too much time already. The conversation with Ethan lingered in his mind. The man was strange, not just because he had offered more money than necessary, but because he hadn't pushed. He hadn't treated Jake like a helpless kid. That was new. But none of it mattered now. Jake still didn't have what he needed. He reached the worn-out apartment building and climbed the stairs two at a time, his sneakers scuffing against the wooden steps. When he reached their door, he hesitated. The air inside was always thick, too warm despite the chill outside, carrying the faint scent of herbal tea and old books. He pressed his ear against the door, listening. The coughing had stopped. Maybe she was asleep. Slowly, he turned the handle and stepped inside. The small apartment was dim, lit only by the glow of a single lamp near the couch. His mother, Sarah, lay bundled under a thick blanket, her face pale, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Jake's stomach twisted. She looked worse than she had that morning. He forced a smile as he approached her. Hey, Mom. Sarah's eyelids fluttered open, and she gave him a tired smile. Jake, she murmured, her voice hoarse. You're out late. Jake shrugged, trying to sound casual. Just looking around. Her gaze flickered to the toy car still in his hands. He saw the understanding dawn in her eyes, followed by something else, sadness. Oh, sweetheart. She reached out a weak hand, and he took it, holding it between his own. You don't have to do this. Jake swallowed hard. We need money. Sarah's fingers squeezed his lightly. We'll be okay. But they wouldn't. Jake knew it, and deep down so did she. She tried to sit up, but the effort left her coughing, her body shaking with the force of it. Jake quickly grabbed the glass of water from the small table beside her and held it out. She took a sip, then sank back against the pillows, exhausted. He hated seeing her like this. I'll figure it out, he said, more to himself than to her. Sarah watched him for a moment, then gently brushed her fingers against his cheek. Jake, listen to me, she said softly. It's not your job to fix everything. Jake's jaw tightened. But if I don't, who will? She didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she gave him a small, tired smile. Come here. Jake hesitated before sitting on the edge of the couch. She rested a weak hand over his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the day pressed against him, but he refused to let it pull him down. Sarah's breathing was slow, uneven. She was trying to stay awake for him, but he could see how much it drained her. Get some sleep, he whispered. She nodded, closing her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing evened out, the exhaustion pulling her under. Jake sat there for a long time watching her, thinking. He had promised himself he wouldn't fail. Tomorrow he would try again. Jake barely slept. He lay on the worn-out couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to his mother's breathing. Each shallow inhale and exhale reminded him of how little time he had to fix things. The apartment was too quiet, too still, except for the occasional hum of a passing car outside. When the first hints of morning light seeped through the thin curtains, he sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His mother was still asleep, her face turned toward the window, her body curled up beneath the blankets. She looked peaceful, but Jake knew better. The fever wasn't gone. He needed a new plan. Selling the car hadn't worked. He had tried asking for work before, but no one wanted to hire a 10-year-old. He could ask Mrs. Thompson, their elderly neighbor, but she had already helped them too much, slipping him a few dollars here and there when she could. Jake ran a hand through his messy brown hair. Maybe he had to take a bigger risk. Ethan had offered him $20 yesterday, but then he'd said something else. Something that stuck with Jake. "Tell me where you live, and I'll bring you more than $20. At first, Jake had thought the guy was messing with him. But now, as he sat there in the dim light of their apartment, the idea didn't seem so crazy. Ethan was different from the other adults. He hadn't looked at Jake with pity. He hadn't talked down to him, and he had come back. If there was even a small chance Ethan was serious about helping, Jake had to take it. He glanced at his mother one last time, making sure she was still asleep. Then, quietly, he grabbed his coat, stuffed the toy car into his pocket, and slipped out the door. The city was already waking up. Shops were opening, the smell of coffee and fresh bagels drifting through the air. People rushed to work, taxis honking, street vendors setting up their carts. The morning chill bit at Jake's skin, but he barely noticed. He wasn't sure if Ethan would be in the same place as before. Maybe the guy had just been passing through, and Jake would never see him again. But he had to try. He made his way back to the subway entrance where they had met the night before. The steps were slick with melted snow, and a few commuters were already hurrying underground, eager to escape the cold. Jake scanned the area, shifting from foot to foot. Nothing. His stomach sank. Maybe he had been stupid to think Ethan would show up again. Maybe the guy had only been curious for a moment and then forgotten all about him. Jake was about to turn away when a voice cut through the morning air. "You're up early." Jake spun around. Ethan stood a few feet away, hands tucked into the pockets of his long coat. He looked almost exactly the same as yesterday, except this time, there was something different in his eyes, something more serious. Jake exhaled, relieved despite himself. "I was looking for you," he admitted. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh." Jake hesitated, then lifted his chin. "You said if I told you where I lived, you'd bring more than $20. Ethan studied him for a long moment. Then, to Jake's surprise, he nodded. "All right," he said. "Let's go." Jake blinked. He hadn't expected Ethan to agree so easily. "Just like that?" Ethan smirked. "You trust me now?" "No," Jake said immediately. Ethan chuckled. "Smart kid." Then he gestured forward. "Lead the way." Jake hesitated for only a second before turning and starting back toward his apartment. Ethan walked beside him, his stride calm, measured. Neither of them spoke as they made their way through the busy streets. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt steady, like something had shifted between them. Like this was only the beginning. Jake kept his pace steady as they walked, but his mind raced. He had spent the entire night thinking about this, about whether he was making a mistake. Trusting people never ended well. His mother had taught him that. But Ethan was different, or at least he seemed different. Ethan followed in silence, his hands tucked into the deep pockets of his coat. He didn't ask questions. He didn't make small talk. It was almost like he understood that Jake wasn't in the mood for conversation. They reached the apartment building sooner than Jake expected. He stopped at the worn-out door, suddenly feeling nervous. Letting Ethan see where he lived made everything feel more real. "This is it," he said, stuffing his hands into his coat pockets. Ethan glanced up at the cracked brick walls, the rusting fire escape that zigzagged up the side of the building, the dim light flickering above the entrance. His expression didn't change, but Jake saw something shift in his eyes. "How long have you lived here?" Ethan asked. Jake shrugged. "A while." Ethan didn't press. Instead, he nodded toward the door. "Your mom home?" Jake hesitated. He wasn't sure why, but suddenly, he didn't want Ethan to see her like this. "Well, weak." Barely able to sit up. But he had come this far. "She's sleeping," he said. "But, you can come in. Just don't wake her up." Ethan gave a small nod. "Got it." Jake pushed the door open and stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The apartment was just as he had left it. Dim, quiet, a little too warm. The scent of old tea still lingered in the air. His mother was still curled up on the couch, her breathing soft but uneven. Ethan stepped in behind him, moving carefully, as if he knew he didn't belong in a place like this. He took in the small living space, the second-hand furniture, the stacks of bills on the kitchen counter that Jake tried not to look at. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, Ethan said, "She doesn't have insurance, does she?" Jake clenched his jaw. He hated that question. Hated the answer even more. "No." Ethan exhaled through his nose, his gaze lingering on Sarah's frail form. "She needs a doctor." Jake snapped his head toward him. "I know that," he whispered harshly. "That's why I was trying to sell the car." Ethan looked at him then. Really looked at him. Jake felt like the guy could see straight through him, like he was putting together pieces of a puzzle Jake didn't even know he was a part of. Finally, Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something. Jake expected money, but instead, Ethan handed him a business card. It was black, sleek, with silver embossed letters. Jake frowned, turning it over in his fingers. "Dr. Marcus Hale. Internal medicine." Jake looked up, confused. "What is this?" "A doctor," Ethan said simply. "A good one." Jake swallowed. "I told you we don't have insurance." "We can't." "You won't have to pay," Ethan interrupted. "I already called him. He'll be here this afternoon." Jake's breath hitched. He stared at Ethan, trying to find the catch. There had to be one. "Why?" he asked. His voice was small, uncertain. "Why are you helping us?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at Sarah again before looking back at Jake. "Because someone once helped me," he said. Jake didn't know what to say. For the first time in a long while, he didn't have to say anything. Jake sat on the edge of the couch, turning the business card over in his hands. His mind was spinning. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He had spent days trying to come up with a way to get the money himself, asking for work, selling the car, doing anything he could to fix things. And now, Ethan had swooped in and handled everything with a single phone call. Didn't feel right. "You don't have to do this," Jake muttered, still staring at the card. Ethan, who had been standing near the small kitchen counter, tilted his head slightly. "Do what?" "Fix everything." Jake's fingers curled around the card. "This is our problem, not yours." Ethan exhaled, slipping his hands into his coat pockets. "Is that what you think?" Jake's jaw tightened. "Yeah." He expected Ethan to argue, to tell him he was just a kid and didn't understand how the world worked. That's what adults usually did. But Ethan didn't do that. Instead, he pulled out one of the worn kitchen chairs and sat down across from Jake. His dark eyes studied him for a long moment before he spoke. "You think that asking for help makes you weak," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. "That if you don't do everything yourself, then it doesn't count." Jake clenched his fists. "It doesn't count. If I don't fix it, then I didn't really do anything." Ethan was silent for a moment. Then he leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You remind me of myself, you know." Jake frowned. "What?" Ethan smirked, but it wasn't a happy one. More like the kind of smile someone makes when they're remembering something they'd rather forget. "When I was your age, I had to take care of my mom too," Ethan said. "She worked herself into the ground, and no one helped us. I decided I was going to fix everything myself. Make enough money so that we'd never have to struggle again." Jake swallowed, but he didn't say anything. Ethan's smirk faded. "But I was wrong." Jake frowned. "How?" Ethan exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "Because by the time I realized I couldn't do everything alone, it was too late." His voice dropped slightly. "She was already gone." Jake's stomach twisted. He knew what Ethan was trying to say. But he had to do this. If he didn't, then what was the point? He stood up abruptly, shoving the card back into Ethan's hands. "I don't need this." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't take the card. "Jake, I don't need you to fix my life." His voice was sharper now, edged with frustration. "I can take care of my mom. I don't need your money. I don't need some doctor, you know. I don't." A weak voice cut through his anger. "Jake." His head snapped toward the couch. His mother was awake. She was watching him, her expression tired but full of something else, something that made Jake's chest ache. Sarah slowly pushed herself up, her arms trembling with the effort. "Jake," she repeated softly. "That's enough." Jake's hands curled into fists. "Mom, I know you want to help me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And you have. Every single day." She smiled weakly. "But you don't have to do it alone." Jake felt something in his throat tighten. Sarah turned her tired gaze to Ethan, who was still watching quietly. "Thank you," she said sincerely. Ethan nodded. "The doctor will be here in a few hours." Jake swallowed hard. He wanted to fight back, to argue. But as he looked at his mother, at the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her body still trembled from the fever, he realized something. This wasn't about pride. This was about keeping her alive. Slowly, reluctantly, he turned back to Ethan. "Fine," he muttered. "But I'm paying you back." Ethan smirked slightly. "We'll see." Jake scowled, but deep down, something in him settled. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't fighting alone. Jake sat by the couch, watching his mother drift back into an uneasy sleep. Her breathing was still too shallow, her skin too warm, but at least now, thanks to Ethan, help was coming. That fact should have made him feel relieved. But instead it just made him feel lost. For so long, it had been just the two of them, and he had carried the weight of their survival on his own. Every day was a battle. Finding food, keeping the lights on, making sure she had what she needed. He had built his whole world around the idea that if he didn't do it, no one else would. And then Ethan had shown up. And in a matter of hours, he had done more for Jake's mom than Jake had been able to do in weeks. He hated that. Jake leaned back against the couch, staring at the cracked ceiling. Across the room, Ethan stood near the small kitchen, pouring himself a cup of water from the sink. He didn't look at Jake, didn't say anything. He just moved with an ease that annoyed Jake even more, like he belonged here, like he understood. Jake clenched his fists. "I still don't trust you." Ethan glanced at him, smirking slightly. "Yeah, I figured." Jake frowned, caught off guard. He had expected Ethan to argue, to try to convince him otherwise. But the man just took a sip of water, completely unbothered. "You're not gonna try and change my mind?" Jake asked. Ethan shrugged. "You don't have to trust me. You just have to accept the help." Jake scowled. "That's the same thing." Ethan let out a quiet laugh. "No, it's not." He set the cup down and leaned against the counter. "Trust is something you build. I don't expect you to believe in me overnight. But accepting help, that's just common sense." Jake gritted his teeth. He hated that Ethan made things sound so simple. Ethan studied him for a moment before continuing. "You're tough, Jake. Can see that. You've been handling things on your own for a long time. But you've been thinking about this all wrong. Jake crossed his arms. Oh yeah. And how should I be thinking about it? Ethan's expression darkened slightly. Like someone who wants to win. Jake blinked. What? Ethan pushed off the counter and walked toward him, sitting down in the chair across from the couch. His gaze was sharp, calculating. You think accepting help means losing, that it makes you weak. But real strength, real power, it comes from knowing when to fight and when to use the resources around you. He leaned forward slightly. That's how you win. Jake frowned. You talk like this is some kind of game. Ethan smirked. Life is a game, kid. And right now, you're playing it the hard way. Jake stared at him, his mind racing. He wanted to reject everything Ethan was saying. He wanted to hold on to the anger, the frustration, the belief that he had to do everything alone. But deep down, a small part of him whispered that maybe, just maybe, Ethan was right. His mom needed him. And if taking help from Ethan meant she had a chance, then maybe pride wasn't worth the price. Maybe survival was more important. Jake let out a slow breath. So, what now? Ethan smiled. Now, you wait for the doctor. And after that, we figure out what's next. Jake didn't know what that meant. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid to find out. The apartment felt different. It wasn't bigger. It wasn't warmer. The walls were still cracked, and the air still carried the faint scent of old tea. But something had changed. Jake could feel it. The doctor had come and gone, leaving behind a small bag of prescribed medication and a firm reassurance. His mom was going to be okay. She needed rest, proper food, and time, but the worst had passed. Jake sat by the window, watching the city move below. He should have felt relief, maybe even happiness. Instead, all he felt was uncertainty. For so long, survival had been his only goal. Every day was about making sure they had enough to scrape by. He never thought about what came after that. Now he had to. Behind him, Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You're thinking too hard, he said. Jake glanced at him. You don't even know what I'm thinking about. Ethan smirked. I can guess. Jake frowned. Yeah, try me. Ethan shrugged. You're wondering what comes next. You spent so much time worrying about keeping your mom alive that now that she's safe, you don't know what to do with yourself. Jake stiffened. He hated how easily Ethan could read him. Jake hesitated, then sighed. I don't know anything else. Ethan studied him for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and tossed it onto the table. Jake frowned. What's that? A job. Jake blinked. What? Ethan nodded toward the paper. An old friend of mine runs a shop downtown. Needs someone to help out a few days a week. Stocking shelves, cleaning up. It's not much, but it's real work. Jake hesitated before picking up the paper. He stared at it, his mind trying to process what Ethan was saying. Why would you do this? He asked. Ethan's smirk faded slightly. Because I told you, I've been where you are. His voice was quieter now, more serious. And I know how dangerous it is to think the only way forward is alone. Jake swallowed. He looked back at the paper. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a choice. He could keep doing what he had always done. Struggling, fighting every day just to survive. Or he could try something different. Something better. Jake exhaled. I don't like owing people. Ethan chuckled. Then don't think of it that way. Think of it as a way to win. Jake stared at him. Then slowly he nodded. Okay. Ethan's smirk returned. Good choice. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt something unfamiliar. Oh. And it scared him just as much as it excited him. The next morning, the city felt different. Jake had walked these streets 1,000 times, but today, every step felt new. Maybe it was because, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just moving to survive, he was moving toward something. The shop Ethan had mentioned was a few blocks away, nestled between a laundromat and a cafe that smelled like fresh bread. The sign above the door read Hale's Market, The letters faded but sturdy. Jake hesitated outside. This was it. The first step toward something he wasn't sure he even understood yet. Behind him, Ethan chuckled. "You gonna stand there all day or actually go in?" Jake scowled but pushed the door open. A bell jingled overhead as he stepped inside. The place was small but packed with shelves of groceries and supplies. The air smelled like wood polish and fresh coffee. Behind the counter, a man in his late 40s looked up from a ledger. He had graying hair, sharp blue eyes, and a no-nonsense expression that reminded Jake of a school principal. "You're the kid?" the man asked, setting down his pen. Jake straightened. "Yeah." The man studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'm Marcus Hale. Ethan says you're tough." Jake glanced at Ethan, who only smirked. Marcus continued. "You work hard, show up on time, and don't steal, and we'll get along fine. You mess around and you're out." "Got it." Jake nodded quickly. "Got it." Marcus grunted, apparently satisfied. "Good. First job. Unpack those boxes in the back." He jerked a thumb toward the storage room. Jake wasted no time, heading toward the back. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but he knew one thing. This wasn't charity. It was real work. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was actually earning something. As he lifted the first box, he heard Ethan and Marcus talking in low voices near the counter. He couldn't make out the words, but he caught one thing before he disappeared into the storage room. Marcus sighed. "You sure about this kid?" Ethan's voice was steady. "Yeah, I am." Jake paused, something tightening in his chest. People didn't take chances on him. Not before. Not ever. But Ethan had. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something more. What does it truly mean to win in life? Is it proving you can do everything alone? Or is it knowing when to accept help and create something greater than yourself? Jake thought survival meant fighting every battle alone, until Ethan showed him another way. Now, standing at the edge of a new path, the question remains. Will he embrace this chance, or will his past fears hold him back? Click the video on the screen to continue this journey of self-discovery and see how Jake's life changes forever. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories that will make you think, feel, and see the world differently. See you in the next one.